period of time spent in the pursuit of muscular hypertrophy and/or increases in muscular strength. Example: your mum's been on that bulk way too long, lad. Tell her to lay off the serious mess.
Alright people, today we're going to talk about bulking, aka gaining phase, aka lean bulking, making gains, building some muscle. So I'm going to sit here, talk for a long time, and I'm going to go through as much of the basics as I can get through, and then maybe some stuff that's a little bit beyond the basics, and then some frequently asked questions as well. So I will timestamp everything and put it in the description of this video, because then obviously you don't have to sit through it all. You can just go to whichever point is most relevant to you. Alright, let's do it. Alright, so before we start, I'm actually going to go through frequently asked question number 1, which is, should I bulk or cut? So I'm going to put this here because obviously if the answer is you should cut, then you don't need to watch the rest of this video and we just saved you some time. So there are obvious extremes that we don't really need to discuss. I don't think, if you're morbidly obese or you're fat to the point where it involves health risks, or underweight to the point where there are health risks, then it's quite evident what you should be doing. But most of us exist somewhere in that grey area on the spectrum where, essentially we need to bulk and cut, because we know that looking at us now, looking at our goal physique, this goal physique is both leaner and bigger than we are currently. So inevitably it will take a series of bulking and cutting phases for us to get from here to there. Now, that can make it difficult to decide which to do first, and there are a few factors that we need to consider, but we also have to understand that they're all related to each other. It's not just as black and white as looking at one thing, such as body fat. For example, if your body fat is above X, then you should be cutting, and if it's below X, then you should be bulking. You can't really say that. You have to consider other factors, such as what your lean mass is like alongside that. So we'll get into these anyway, but factor number 1 is body fat levels. Aside from body fat levels that are extremely high or low to the point where it's unhealthy, you might die at any moment, really what's important is your body fat levels in comparison to the level of body fat that you are going to be comfortable walking around at. So I am all for minimizing fat gains during a bulk, the lean part of lean bulk, and we'll get to that later. But inevitably, for the vast majority of us, muscle gain will come with some fat gain. So obviously if you are close to your threshold of body fat that you're going to be comfortable with, then maybe it's worth shedding a bit first, because if otherwise you're going to be bulking for a very short amount of time before you hit that threshold. And also, if you're close to it, you will carry out the bulk with less conviction, because you'll always be thinking, fuck, shit, like grabbing yourself and like looking at yourself in the mirror and thinking, I'm a little bit of a fatty. So factor number 2, current lean mass, or how much muscle you have at the moment. So even if you're a relatively high body fat percentage, it might still be worth you bulking first if you have a very low muscle mass. So if you're in that kind of skinny fat zone, then your TDE is going to be pretty low compared to what it could be if you spent a prolonged time bulking. And so cutting might not be the most productive for you, because you're going to find it very hard to lose fat now, as opposed to a little further down the line once you spend time gaining muscle and increasing your TDE. Now on top of that, you also have to bear in mind that 15% body fat, let's just say as an example, can look pretty bad on somebody with very little muscle mass. It can look almost chubby. However, if it's on a person who has more muscle mass, they can almost look lean, and so the same body fat percentage will look much better on a frame that has some kind of muscle underneath. Now obviously you're going to gain some fat while you bulk, but if you can keep that to a minimum, then you're still going to be looking better after a bulk. So that's fact number 2. So the final factor I consider is something I would call growth potential. Now, that's probably made up of a few different things, but the main ones we'll talk about is age and training age. So if you are fairly young, late teens up to late 20s, then that's the peak of your testosterone life, essentially, and when you're going to find it easiest to build muscle. Once you get 30, 35, 40, 45, it's going to get exponentially harder for you to build muscle. And so really, if you have a lot of muscle to build between your current physique and your goal physique, it's worth getting busy now. If there's any way you can get away with a bulk, get doing it. Now, on top of that, if you're in your first couple of years of training, you will be much more responsive than you would be once you've trained 5 years, 10 years. So you should be taking advantage of those couple of things while you can. I would say, as a general guideline, if you're under the age of 25, I would probably limit cutting to one cut a year, one 12 to 16 week cut per year. Maybe maintain for a month or two throughout summer. I know people want to be lean for the holidays and festivals and whatever it is. So, by all means do that. But then the rest of the time should be committed to a long, slow bulk. Okay, so regardless of all of the above, by far the most important thing is simply to decide and then act on that decision with conviction. So I will tell you now, indecisiveness kills gains, man. Indecisiveness is catabolic. And if you are half-assed bulking or half-assed cutting and doing one and thinking the grass is always greener, then it's going to be a massive hindrance to your progress. So the key point is decide and stick to it. Assuming that you've now decided to bulk, you need some calories to start bulking on. And I would say there's 3 main steps to finding this number. So step 1 would be to get on Google and search for some TDE calculators. So that's typical daily energy expenditure, which is the number of calories you need to maintain your body weight. So maintenance calories. Now, you get plenty of results here, and I would generally tend towards the ones that allow you to input the most information. So I'd maybe do 3 or 4 of these, and then take all those numbers and you can either average them, or if you have some rough idea of where your TDE might be based on maybe you've tracked for a while previously, then you can just choose whichever you think is most appropriate. I would go with averaging them, to be honest. So once you've done that, you have your theoretical TDE. Alright, once you've got the number, what you're going to do is add a number of calories to that to give an appropriate caloric surplus to bulk on, so hopefully enough calories to build muscle whilst keeping fat gain to a minimum. So the amount of calories you add to that theoretical TDE should be somewhere around, I'd say, 100 as a minimum to probably a maximum of around 400 calories. Now that is quite high, and for the most part people will not be able to get away with that. I know we'd like to eat that much, but the sad truth is that will end in disaster. So where you lie on that scale of how many calories to add to this theoretical maintenance would depend on, again, your growth potential. So your age, your training age, your gender, your size to begin with, and also your willingness to gain fat, so how much fat you're actually willing to gain. Now, let's assume that we want to keep that down. So, for example, if you are 18, you're 6 foot plus, and you're generally quite ectomorph, you've been training for under 2 years, I would be looking at a 300 calorie surplus, somewhere around the top end of that scale. Now, if you're late 20s and you've been training for a few years and you're 5'7", then I would be looking at a maximum of like a 200 calorie surplus, but possibly less, because your potential to gain muscle and actually make use of those calories is going to be far less. So you have to kind of think about all those factors together and decide where on that scale you're going to lie. But in general, I would say be conservative, because there is no rush. You don't want to overshoot and then be like, oh shit, you know, maybe I should have been a bit more cautious to begin with, because now I'm a fat fuck. Alright, so step 3 would basically just be to trial those calories and then change them on a reactive basis. So what you would do is monitor your body weight. Now, if you have scales at home, which is preferable, then I would weigh yourself first thing in the morning before you eat or drink anything, and if you have a shit in the morning, after you've had a shit. So that'll be the most accurate body weight you can get. And I would weigh yourself every day over the course of what is essentially the longer the better, so nothing less than 2 weeks. And in that time, you should be looking for an appropriate weight gain. Which brings me on to FAQ number 2. What is an appropriate weight gain? Again, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all answer, and I wish I could give you black and white rules and say, if this, then do this, but you know, sadly, like a lot of life, it's not like that. We have to consider a range of factors and place ourselves somewhere on a scale. So the things that are going to mean you can get away with a higher rate of weight gain, it's basically everything that contributes to your growth potential. So being young, having a young training age, therefore being more responsive to resistance training, being male helps. Also, there's a genetic factor. You know, there isn't just one set natty limit. We all have different potential for building muscle, and so that's something to consider as well. Your quality of training, there are a lot of things, but generally, to get a realistic view of what's appropriate, what I would do is measure your rate of weight gain over a short period of time. Now, I say short, but obviously the longer the better, because what you're going to do is scale it up over a year, and then obviously if it's a shorter period of time, then any error involved in that, which will inevitably come with natural fluctuations, would be multiplied by, you know, a larger factor. So let's say I have a client who is gaining an average of a pound a week over 3 or 4 weeks. Now, I would scale that up and say that's 52 pounds a year. So is it realistic that somebody could gain anywhere close to 52 pounds of muscle per year naturally? Now, the answer is a resounding no. And so then I would look at that and say, right, this person needs to reduce the calories and aim for a lower rate of, or a slower rate of weight gain. So let's take myself an example. Generally, as a rule of thumb, and I don't like putting numbers in, but I want to commit to something, I would say 1% of your total body weight per month is a good kind of rate of weight gain to aim for. Now, obviously those factors that I've mentioned before might mean it's a little above or a little below that. So for me, I'm assuming it would be a little below that because I've been training a long time. I'm 27, and contrary to what many people might think, I don't think I've got particularly great genetics for my actual ability to build muscle. So let's say I weigh 180 pounds, actually I think 175 or something like that, but let's say for the sake of argument I weigh 180 pounds. Now that would be weight gain of 1.8 pounds per month, which would be 21.6 pounds in a year. Now when I think about that, that is actually quite a lot. I can't imagine myself being another 20 odd pounds heavier, and it certainly could not be made up of the majority muscle. And so I would probably go a little bit lower than that. I'd probably go for between £1 and 1.5 pounds per month, and I would still assume that there's going to be a fair bit of fat gain that is going to come along with that. So that's as much info as can really give you on rate of weight gain. You have to judge all the factors and try and put yourself somewhere on that scale, but you know, if you're gaining something like £1 a week or something, it's just crazy. back the fuck off, man. Alright, this brings me on to FAQ number 3, which is, when should I increase my calories on a bulk and by how much? I don't want to give any specific guidelines, i.e. increase your calories by 100 every month, because that would be based on a false assumption that your body and specifically your rate of weight gain is going to behave in a linear fashion, and I can tell you from experience that that is very rarely going to be the case, and so you can't preempt that and just try and couple it with a linear increase in your calories. So instead, what I would do is base any increase on calories reactively on plateaus in your weight and performance in the gym. So let's say your weight has stalled for a week or two, I probably wouldn't think about increasing calories yet. Now, if it's stalled for maybe 3 weeks and it's accompanied by a plateau in your lifts, which should be in those hypertrophy rep ranges, then I would probably think about adding maybe 100 calories, something like that. I wouldn't go overzealous with it, because if you think about it, if you've been gaining weight steadily on a set number of calories, it would be a bit wild for your TDEE, your maintenance, to suddenly catch up with that, and all of a sudden this is your new maintenance. So I wouldn't go acting as if this is your new maintenance. I'd just say, well, maybe my TDEE has increased a little and this is closer to my maintenance, and instead of not gaining weight, this is just very slow weight gain. Now, some people will have very, very adaptive metabolisms where they will tend towards their TDEE, will tend towards the calories they're on much more than other people, and so they will have to increase calories more and more frequently, and vice versa on a cut. But for the most part, I would again be quite conservative with it. Wait until your weight and lifts have stalled for a little while, and then maybe add 100 calories at a time. FAQ 3.1, where should those calories come from? I would say primarily carbs, but you also have to consider that as your carbs get higher and higher during a bulk, the proportion of your protein that is coming from quote unquote whole complete sources is getting lower, because you're getting a lot of trace proteins from the high carb intake you have. So I would also accompany it with a couple of grams of protein here and there. Alright, so that brings me on to macros now. Fuck, how much protein do you eat on a bulk, man? That's the $1 million question. It's a $1 million question, but generally I would go with a range somewhere between 0.8 grams to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. You might want to go a little bit higher, you might want to go a little bit lower, but by all intents and purposes, you're going to be safe in that range, safe, and your gains aren't going to be massively affected. Now, obviously, the higher body fat percentage you are, the lower lean mass, and so probably the lower your protein requirement is. Now, I would stay away from going massively high in protein, because personally, and not just personally, but I think it's probably a good idea to keep your carbs as high as possible, because you want to be putting a lot of focus on your performance in the gym. It's not just about gaining weight. You need to ensure that the highest proportion possible of that weight is coming from muscle, which will come as a result of progressive overload, your lifts improving in the gym, and to do that you need to be able to perform well, and a diet higher in carbs is much more likely to be conducive to that than one with a massive surplus of protein or a massive surplus of fat. So what I would do is keep protein to between 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. I'd keep fat between 0.35 to 0.5 grams per pound of body weight, and then I'd fill the remaining calories up with carbs. So you have a little bit of room to play with there, just which you can base on personal preference, and don't get caught up in 0.1, 0.2 grams here and there. consistency and adherence is the key, not the finer details of crossing I's and dotting T's. Dotting I's and crossing T's. That's it for macros. Let's do training. Actually, let's not do training. Let's do micros before we do macros, because if you just go through hitting your macros, you might just be eating a chicken breast, some white rice, and then a handful of nuts. And while that's all well and good, we need fruit and veg or we'll die. So before any kind of aesthetic pursuit or performance pursuit, you need a base level of health, and this is not to be overlooked, man, because if you think about it, a healthy body is one that's in the best position to perform well, and obviously what we call aesthetics, is based on performance on some level, and so eat your fucking veg, man. Okay, so let's get into the training side of things, and I want to start with training frequency, and then we'll build from there. So your training frequency is essentially how many times per week you are hitting each muscle group. So it doesn't necessarily have to be per week, but that's the time constraint that we'll use. So to cut a long story short, we should be aiming to hit each muscle group twice a week. The evidence seems to suggest that twice a week is better than once a week, and it's not really been confirmed whether more is better beyond twice. So maybe hitting each muscle group 3 times a week is better than twice, but you have to think about, is that really convenient and practical for most of us to be able to hit each muscle group 3 times a week whilst maintaining some kind of sufficient volume? You would end up doing very few reps and sets in order to get all of those muscle groups in 3 times. And so I think for all intents and purposes, we should aim for twice a week. So with that in mind, let's go through some split examples. Now, you don't necessarily have to stick to these, there's just an example of how you can fit things in. So if you were training twice a week, I would recommend doing 2 full body sessions. Now, since they're full body sessions, they might end up being quite high volume, quite long sessions in order to get everything in. You have to really put your isolation exercises down the bottom on your list of priorities and focus solely on your compounds, or at least primarily on your compounds. So they'd be fairly long sessions, but at least if you're only training twice a week, maybe you've got the time to do that. So 3 times a week, I would do an upper, a lower, and a full body workout. 4 times a week, I do upper, lower, upper, lower. 5 times a week, I do push, pull, legs, upper, lower. 6 times a week, I do push, pull, legs, and then beyond that, you don't really need to train more than 6 times a week. So take a rest, bro. Okay, so you've got a training split, and although yes, I sell training programs, I'm not going to sit here and say everyone needs to follow a program or you're not going to make any gains, because for a select few, for maybe a lot of you, a training split will suffice and you will be able to make gains solely with that. Now, there is a caveat to that, and I would strongly suggest that if you're not going to follow any kind of structured routine or program, and if you're just going to go, right, I'm doing push pull legs, then I would encourage you to at least keep some exercises and rep ranges consistent for certain periods of time, maybe 4 weeks at a time as a rough estimate, just so that you're able to track your progression on those lifts. So if you go in and one day you're on your push workout and you go, right, I'm going to do flat barbell bench press as my first exercise and I'm going to do high reps, and then the following push workout, you say, right, I'm going to do incline dumbbells, I'm going to do low reps, then there's no way for you to equate those 2 lifts, the different exercises and different rep ranges, and so you're not able to really force yourself into that progressive overload that you really need. And so if you're just going to stick to a split, fine, but keep some things consistent enough to be able to apply progressive overload. So which is the best rep range for hypertrophy? And the evidence seems to suggest that there isn't a specific one, and it's much less important than first thought. So Typically we're given 8 to 12 reps as the hypertrophy rep range, but it's actually probably much wider than that, like 5 to 15 or even wider than that. And within that range, you can make very similar gains whether you're at the top end or the bottom end of it. So there have been studies where people have done sets of 4 compared to sets of 10 and seen very similar gains in terms of hypertrophy, and there are plenty of studies similar to that as well. The only caveat is lower rep ranges tend to do better in terms of strength improvements, which I guess makes sense. So should we just choose one rep range and stick with it forever? Well, maybe, possibly, but probably not. So what a lot of people tend to do is train in a specific rep range for a certain amount of time and then move on to another rep range for a certain amount of time and then another rep range for a certain amount of time. And these phases in different rep ranges, or mesocycles, constitute periodization. So that might sound more complicated than it really is, but in essence, if you're training and you are changing any element of your training over time, effectively you are periodizing your training. So there are a few types of periodization, and I'll come on to those shortly, but I want to say firstly that there is very little evidence, at least that I can find, that periodized training is beneficial for hypertrophy. So what I mean by that is there are just a lack of studies. Now, perhaps I'm not the best researcher, but I just couldn't find any. I could find plenty in regards to the benefits of periodization for strength training. And so what I would be inclined to do would be assume based off that, just because of how interrelated strength and hypertrophy are, that if it is beneficial for one, it is more likely than not that it will also be beneficial for the other. So the two most common types of periodization that people tend to implement is linear periodization, which is starting off in a fairly high rep phase and then spending maybe 3 to 6 weeks there before moving into a lower rep phase, then 3 to 6 weeks there, and so on, and progressively lowering the rep ranges and increasing the weight used. So aside from that, there is daily undulating periodization, which involves possibly multiple rep ranges within the same training week. So whereas linear focuses primarily on one rep range for a solid block before moving into another, daily undulating periodization, or DUP, focuses on many within the same training week. So for example, if you're doing an upper lower split, training 4 times a week, and you're doing one of those upper lowers as low reps and one as high reps, essentially that's a form of DUP. So in general, from what I can gather, it seems like there isn't much of a significant reported difference in those when studied one versus the other. So essentially, choose one. Alright, what I'm going to do now is actually go through putting together the bare bones of a training routine slash, maybe we'll call it a program, maybe we'll put in some linear periodization and create a bare bones program. Okay, so what I've got here is an Excel document with some borders drawn in just to make it a little bit clearer to see. And I'm doing a 4-day upper lower split here. So in this instance, my second upper lower will actually almost be identical to my first upper lower. So if I was going to do a DUP program, I might do a high rep upper lower first and then a low rep upper lower for the second 2 days. So that day 3 would become upper day 2 or upper B. However you want to say it, but this time around the first 2 and the second 2 will be identical. So what I'm going to do is just copy all this stuff and then paste it into another 4 tabs. So I've got a phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, 4, and also a deload week, which we'll come on to in a bit. So phase 1. Now, there's no real set time limit or time frame that you have to stick to. I would say between 2 and 6 weeks for each phase probably. And if it's a particularly intense phase, I would go toward the lower end of that scale. So let's talk about exercise selection. Now, I will just leave these as very general terms, such as horizontal push exercise, which is, for example, a bench press. Now, I'm going to do that because I don't know what exercises you like to do, what equipment you have available in your gym, if you have any injuries and stuff like that. And so I'm just going to leave it very general and let you fill in everything you want to fill in yourself. So the bare bones of a upper body workout should be comprised of essentially your 4 compounds: your horizontal push, your horizontal pull, your vertical push, and your vertical pull. Now, after this, you might be tempted to put in some bicep and tricep isolations, but I would say, looking at that, it's already a very taxing day. You've got 4 compounds there that are potentially going to fatigue you quite a lot, and I'm not sure how much you're really going to get out of another 2 exercises. So at most, I would then put in 1 isolation exercise there. So what I'd do is probably put in bicep isolations, and then when I go down to the second upper day, I would put in tricep isolations there. The only other exercise I would say include as an essential movement would be some form of lateral raises, whether it's with dumbbells or on a lateral raise machine. After that, let's do the lower body workout. So I would start with a leg pressing movement. So that could be a squat, leg press, Bulgarian split squat, weighted lunges, front squat, anything. Then I'd go on to a quad isolation, followed by a hamstring exercise. So that could be leg curls or RDLs or something like that. And you can also play around with your exercise order based on what your priorities are. So obviously, if you think about the exercises towards the front of the workout, you're probably gonna get the most out of those. And so if you want to prioritize hams over quads, then put your hamstring exercise before quads. So it also include a calf pressing movement, and then just an extra accessory, whether you want to do a glute exercise, adductors, abductors. I'd probably be inclined to put glute bridges in there personally. So I'm just going to copy that down to day 4, and then we're going to talk about rep ranges. So like I said, with a linear periodization approach, typically you'll start with a high rep range, and then as you get towards the end of the program, you'll go lower rep range and heavier weight. So let's just fill all these in with 12s. Okay, so I'm just going to look at my overall volume so far, and I've got 5 sets of 12 on 4 separate compounds, plus my isolation on day 1. I can tell just from looking at it that is going to be far too much, and I'm going to get fatigued way too early in that workout, and my latter exercises are really going to suffer. So what I'm going to do is get rid of a few of these. I'm just going to grab all these and just block them out and say 4 sets of 12 is the maximum I'm doing for any exercise. What I may actually do is just put in 1 lower rep heavier set at the end of my main compounds, for example, maybe at the end of my sets of squats. And what that can help to do is just to halt your regression in those rep ranges. So when you are training in a specific rep range, the adaptations that occur will be specific to that rep range. So for example, here you are getting better at doing sets of 12. Now, often while you're doing that, your lower rep sets would suffer. And so if you did a 5 rep max and then you didn't do any sets of 5 for perhaps 4 to 6 weeks and then went back to do a 5 rep max, in all likelihood it's going to have decreased, even if your sets of 12 have increased. And so what we can do to at least reduce that or stop it from happening is just put the odd lower rep set in here and there, and vice versa when you're doing a primarily low rep phase and you just include maybe 1 or 2 high rep sets. Okay, so let's just briefly touch on RPE. So that stands for rate of perceived exertion, which is essentially a measure of how difficult your set is. And typically that will be on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the easiest, 10 being the hardest. So for example, an RPE 10 on a set of 12, you would use your 12 rep max. So a weight such that you could not get 13 reps out. Now, what this is there for really is just to regulate the difficulty of your sets and stop you from either making everything too easy or making everything too difficult, which is a possibility. So what I would say is, for the most part, I would take your final set of each exercise to or very close to failure. Now obviously sometimes that's not practical. If it's squats, don't go to failure because you'll die. Now, aside from that, the bulk of your sets should be difficult, but not to the point of failure. So maybe a couple of reps away from failure. So the bulk of your RPE should be 7s and 8s. In terms of rep ranges, just take as long as you need. Now, obviously within reason, because you have to keep your workout to a realistic duration that's practical for getting on with life. But don't be afraid to take 2 minutes, even up to 3 minutes if you're really tired between your big sets of squats or deadlifts or whatever, and you need that time, because if your subsequent set is going to benefit from that, it's going to benefit you overall. If you're taking very short rest periods of 30 to 60 seconds, you're likely affecting the load that you can lift in each subsequent set just due to the fatigue from the previous one. And in essence, what you're doing there is training more for endurance than anything else. Okay, so let's go into phase 2, and what I'm going to do is just copy all of these exercises across. Now, obviously these aren't specific exercises, it's just a generic term. Horizontal push exercise could mean anything, so you have to choose your own. And when you're moving across phases, you don't necessarily have to change exercises. Now you could do, so this could be horizontal push exercise 2. Maybe you could go from barbell bench press into dumbbell incline bench, but not necessarily. If you're making good progress on an exercise, then there's no reason that you have to change that, and it might actually benefit you to stick with the same one. One thing you could do is switch up the order of exercises if you wanted to ensure that each compound, for example, on your upper body day gets a phase where it is prioritized. Then you could each phase swap the order of those. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to do that. You may want to bring up your shoulders or focus on those over maybe your lats, and so maybe every upper body workout you start with your overhead press movement. So rep ranges for this phase are going to be primarily sets of 10. So as we take the reps down each subsequent phase, in order to hit the same RPE, i.e. the same level of difficulty on our sets, we would have to increase the weight we use. Okay, so into phase 3, which may be primarily sets of 8, and then finally onto phase 4, which would be even lower, and possibly your lowest rep phase if you chose to end it here with sets of 5 for the most part. Now, obviously, in doing that, you have to think of the practicalities of doing sets of 5 almost to failure for some exercises. So, for example, what is an adductor machine gonna feel like going close to your 5 rep max? Or what are dumbbell lateral raises gonna feel like going close to your 5 rep max? Because I would be worried about my shoulder coming out and my arms being left on the ground like Mr. Potato Head. So for those exercises and ones where it's just generally impractical, I would keep it to reps of 6 up to 8 maybe. So although our rep ranges are decreasing as we go through this program, the specific ones don't have to be as they are here. So if you have maybe some strength goals coupled with your hypertrophy goals, you might want to start a lot lower and finish a lot lower. So finally, I've just got a deload week here, and I won't talk about this too much, but essentially this would be a week that you'd put in once in a while just to give your central nervous system a rest and allow some form of recovery beyond your 3 days off a week, this would essentially just be going through your usual split, but at maybe 60 to 80% of your usual intensity. So all your RPEs would be down in the 5, 6, maximum 7 kind of range. Alright people, it's starting to get dark, so you have to excuse it's just dark. Anyway, hopefully that gives you some idea of how you might be able to set your training up. Now, obviously it's not very specific, but if you can take your circumstances and apply it to that as a basic structure, then you'll be doing all right. So as a follow-on from that, I want to segue nicely into how to apply progressive overload, because this is obviously, let's call it a frequently asked question. So to give it a simple definition, progressive overload is doing more over time. Now that more, it doesn't have to necessarily come in the form of a heavier weight. Now it can, and for the most part will for you and I, but examples of progressive overload may be performing your set the same number of reps with heavier weight, obviously. Performing your set with the same weight for an extra rep or an extra 2 reps. Performing the same number of reps with the same weight and a greater range of motion. So, for example, you see people doing deficit deadlifts. That's a form of progressive overload. So you get the idea anyway. There are a lot, but let's focus on maybe the simplest and most easily applicable. So by no means is this the only method of applying progressive overload. Some programs will have it already built in, because instead of being based on an RPE system, which is kind of much more easily to cheat on, they'll have it based on a percentage of 1 rep max, or percentage of a calculated 1 rep max, which means that you'll get to a stage in your program and you will have to perform a set number of reps with this specific weight. And if you can't do it, maybe you repeat the week, maybe you go back to another week, whatever. But that's one way that people actually implement it into programs. Now, if you're doing a program where you're trying to regulate the difficulty of your sets, now it can be a little bit harder to consistently have that impetus to overload. So what I would suggest is, let's say we're doing 4 sets of 10 on bench press. Now, let's say I'm really strong and I can do 20 kilograms a side, so let's say it's 60 kilograms. Now, if I can do that for my 4 sets of 10 and I can get it out with perfect form, assuming it was difficult to some extent, what I'd then do, the following push workout would be pick up some 1.25 kilogram plates, or maybe some 2.5 kilogram plates. Like, they're not just for like small people. That's what they're for. They are for adding small increments to your lifts, because over time the compounding effect of that equates to quite a large, significant increase in your lifts. And so what I would do is find perhaps a 1.25 kilogram plate for each side of the bar. So I'd now be pressing 62.5 kilograms, and I'd do that for my 4th set, say. So I'd do my first 3 sets on the weight that I lifted the previous week, and then I'd work backwards from the end. So I'd try and increase on my 4th set, and if I can't do that, I'd try it again the next week, and if I can't do it again, I'd try it again the next week, and if I keep not being able to do it, I'd go back down the weight, but hopefully that shouldn't happen. If I can do it, I'd move that weight back a set into my 3rd set. So I'd now do 2 sets on 60 kilograms and then 2 sets on 62.5 kilograms, and I'd work back until I can do all of my sets with this weight. Once I've done that, it's a case of rinse, repeat, and do the same thing, add another small increment and start from the back set again. Now, doing that, starting from the back set, it just means that you're not going to overshoot and then pretty much fuck up your later sets. So for example, if I think, right, I feel strong today, I want to go for a PR on my first set for 10 reps or whatever, and then I I miss it. Even if I do it, it's going to greatly impact my subsequent sets to the point where my total load lifted may actually be worse than if I hadn't have tried it. So that's how I would recommend doing it. Now, there are other ways, but we're here watching my YouTube channel, so here we go. Caveat to that, or a thing to think about: if your rep ranges aren't consistent through your sets, it's more difficult. Now, I've been through phases of preferring to do like a pyramid style rep range throughout my sets. So I would start with maybe a set of 8, then a set of 6, and then my heaviest set would be my middle set of 4 or 5 reps, and then I go back up to 6 reps and up to 8 reps again for the final set. So in those instances, it's a little bit harder to keep track of because it's hard to really equate. But obviously, then I would aim for the middle set peaking, and I wouldn't go from that last set again. Cardio, dreaded cardio. Should you do it on a bulk? This is FAQ number, I don't even fucking know at this point. Yes, because going back to what I was saying earlier, way earlier, about micronutrients and general health, we should try and be healthy people just for longevity. Now, aside from that, if you don't give a fuck and all you care about is looking good as opposed to actually feeling good and being healthy, then I would still encourage you to do some cardio, because your fitness can help with your lifting. Now, if you're gassing after 4 deadlifts, that's inevitably going to affect your sets when you might be going up to 8 or 10. That's one reason. Now, the other reason is if you maintain a level of fitness, then when you come to cut, when you're more likely to implement cardio for the fat burning benefits of it rather than the cardiovascular, fitness, then you'll be in a better position to do, hopefully more productive cardio sessions in terms of the calories you're able to burn. So if you are on a cut and you need to do 300 calories worth of cardio, and you get on the stepper and you gas in after 20 cals, then it's less than ideal. So that would be another reason I would suggest keeping up with some form of cardio. Now, in terms of the type of cardio you do, then I would say keep it specific to what you enjoy most for an element of adherence, and also what you're likely to do on a cut, because specificity, if you do it now, you'll be better at it then. Frequently asked question number, who the fuck even knows anymore? Should your training differ between a bulk and a cut? For the most part, I would say no, because funnily enough, the best way to build muscle is also the best way to retain muscle. Now, yes, you may include more cardio or something, extra bits like that, but your resistance routine should remain, for the most part, unchanged. You may have to make certain allowances when you're in the dark times, the deep end of a cut, for your, I guess, lower capacity to perform just due to the adverse effects of a calorie deficit. So you may have to reduce some kind of volume there, but don't if you don't have to. So essentially, keep your training the same. Oh, another reason why you should do that is because if you're all of a sudden changing your routine up a lot, it's gonna make it very difficult for you to then track your lifts and general performance accurately. So if you're going from a bulk into a cut, that transition time is a terrible time to be doing anything drastic to your routine, and it may increase the likelihood of you losing gains on that cut. Alright, let's do supplements. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Take creatine, it works and it's fucking essential. Now, there are some other things that work, such as beta-alanine, that works as well. But I would say the only absolute essential should be creatine. Stuff like pre-workout, BCAAs, they would be more for when you cut and stuff like that. Aside from that, well done for making it through this whole fucking video. I've chatted way too much to a camera today. It's actually weird. I've sat in my apartment for a long time talking. I think I'm going out of my fucking mind. But before we end the video, we're going to thank everyone for watching by doing a giveaway right there. This is a box of supplements. It's not the one I'm going to give away, it's just my one, but we'll give away some other ones. So I WhatsApped the bulk powders guy and I said, yo, I'm doing a video about bulking. Can I give away some supplements to some people? And he said, yeah mate, that sounds like a great idea, do it. So we're gonna do a little competition, right? And it's like one of those competitions that, let's be honest, it's not really a competition, it's just to drive engagement on my video. So do me a favor, like the video, leave a comment. Comment could be anything. You can just say Aya, you can say I'm done, you can say Joe Delaney is my hero, you're a sick guy, let me touch your silky smooth hair. Anything like that will suffice, and we'll either use a random number generator or an unbiased individual to choose somebody at random to win some supplements. So I don't know what you're gonna win yet. I'm just gonna make it up and put it on the screen now. Alright, I think that's everything. I don't know, I'm tired. I'm gonna go eat a yogurt, man. See you later.
Joe Delaney is my hero.